Hockey card fans, welcome back to the channel. First of all, kudos to the Florida Panthers for winning the Stanley Cup. I was rooting for them the entire series. I did not want to see Edmonton win the Cup. Had it been Vancouver or Winnipeg, I definitely would have been for them. And I'm a Habs fan, so I definitely would have rather seen Montreal in the final, in the playoffs. But you can't have everything. I was rooting for Florida because, A, they've only made the playoffs, 10 times in their 30-year history. This is their third Stanley Cup final appearance, and they deserve to win. They'd had a really good team for the last 3 seasons, and finally did it. Also makes Calgary look pretty bad because Calgary got rid of a couple of players to Florida, in Tkachuk and Sam Bennett. So it looks bad on Calgary, because they gave away some talent in that deal. Also looks good on the Leafs because Paul Maurice, who used to coach the Maple Leafs, got a cup, got a ring with the Panthers. Paul Maurice has been a coach who can take projects, but he can never get over the hump with Winnipeg or Carolina. And he finally did it with Florida. So kudos to Paul Maurice. Anyway, so moving back to the hockey cards, I went down to St. Jacob's antique store looking for deals again. Last time I went there, I got a lot. This time around, it wasn't as good. It seemed like the prices had jumped up with just inflation. But I managed to get about 15 hockey cards for about $38 with taxes, and counting the taxes. These are going to be from 4 different sets. But anyway, let's jump right into it. First off, we're going to go with the 1972 O-PEE-CHEE set. So this is the 71-72 set. This is when Boston won their last Stanley Cup with Bobby Orr. They'd won in 1970 and again in 72. We have center for the New York Islanders, Terry Crisp. Paid $1 for this card. It's got soft edges. They're the yellow, orange backs, I guess. Light orange back. Paid $1 for it. Now, Terry Crisp is in a St. Louis Blues jersey, so he was picked up by the Islanders in the expansion draft. He did go on later and played for the Philadelphia Flyers, where he won 2 Stanley Cups with them. And as a coach, he won a Stanley Cup with the Calgary Flames as a coach. He also won 2 Central Pacific Hockey League championships with the Oklahoma City Blazers, which is kind of cool. When he was with St. Louis, he'd been to 2 Stanley Cup finals in 68 and 69 and 70. And was picked up in the expansion draft from the Boston Bruins. So Boston gave up a lot of talent in the late 60s. Terry Crisp had also played for the St. Mary's Lincolns and actually went to high school with my mother for a year. So there's that as well. All right, moving along, we have from the 1970 O-PEE-CHEE set. So this is a 69-70 stat year. This is when Boston won their first Stanley Cup in forever. This is also called the Movie Star set because it has the lighting in the back. But first up we have LA Kings left winger Bob Pulford. He's actually in his Toronto jersey, but he got traded to the Kings or picked up by the Kings. Paid $4 for this card. It's not bad, just the cut's bad in the back. This is the lime green, I guess, or light green on the backing with all the information. And you can see what we mean by movie star, where it's got the 4 light stars in there. Pulford, of course, had won Stanley Cups with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he was part of the last team that won a Stanley Cup for the Leafs. And let's hope that stays like that. So he's got 4 Stanley Cup rings with the Leafs. He played 2 years with the Kings, and then he coached the Kings as well as the Chicago Blackhawks. Won a Jack Adams Award in 74-75 because the Kings had a 42, 17, and 21 record for 105 points, which I think is the most they've ever had in their history, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong on that one. He is not in the Hall of Fame. I kind of thought he would be, as he was part of those Leafs teams that won 4 Stanley Cups in the 60s. And next we have right winger, Chicago Blackhawks, Chico Mackey. Paid $4 for this card again. It's in pretty good shape. There's no real dings in it. His real name is Ron Chico Mackey. That's his nickname, Chico. Don't ask me why. He did win a Stanley Cup in 1960-61 with the Chicago Blackhawks. Although he never played in the regular season, he did play one game in the playoffs. So he got a I'm not sure if his name's on the cup. I'd have to check that out. But he's definitely Stanley Cup. And after that, starting in 1962-63, he became a regular with the Blackhawks. So those two cards from that set. I'll move these up. Moving along, we're going to the 69 O-PEE-CHEE set, so the 68-69 stat year. This is Montreal Stanley Cup again. This is called the Postage Stamp Series because it looks like where you put a postage stamp on some of them. And we're going to start with St. Louis Blues defenseman Barclay Plager. Paid $1.50 for this card. Just some minor dings in it. You flip over to the back, and it's got the cartoon in the back. And he was one of 3 brothers who played for St. Louis at one time last season. I knew two of them were brothers who played. I didn't know all 3 of them were. So it's kind of interesting that you'd have all 3 brothers playing. And you see on some of the All-Star cards or the trophy cards, they have like a postage stamp you can put on, which is why I call it the Postage Stamp Series. Plager had been in the minors for so many years before he got selected in the expansion draft for St. Louis. Played his entire career with St. Louis and even coached them after he was done playing as a head coach and then as an assistant coach. Other than that, he won an Eastern Pro Hockey League with Hull Ottawa Canadiens, Central Pacific Hockey League title with the Omaha Knights, and then again he won a Central Hockey League title with the Kansas City Blues. So all his success was in the minors, but he was an integral part of those 3 St. Louis Blues teams that went to the Stanley Cup Finals, but never could win. They lost twice to Montreal and once to Boston. And then we have defenseman for the Philadelphia Flyers, Larry Hillman. Paid $3 for this card. I know Larry Hillman later played for the Buffalo Sabres, so I have his card for them. He'd actually won a Stanley Cup with the Detroit Red Wings back in 54-55. Played only 7 games that year in the regular season and 3 in the playoffs. So he played with Gordie Howe. Played with the Boston Bruins in the 50s, Toronto Maple Leafs in the 60s. Did win a cup with the Toronto Maple Leafs in 1963-64 and again in 66-67. But he was back and forth between the Leafs and the minors. And then at the time, if you read the cartoon in the back, Larry has played on more NHL teams than anyone else, 6. That record's obviously been broken. But back then, that was a thing. So he won a Stanley Cup with Detroit. He won 2 Stanley Cups with Toronto. He won an AHL title with the Rochester Americans in 65. He then went on in 69 to win a Stanley Cup with Montreal. He was traded from Minnesota to Montreal. He played 25 games in the regular season and 1 game in the playoffs for Montreal to win a cup. And then to cap it off, he won a Avco trophy in the WHA with the Winnipeg Jets. So this guy won wherever he went, except for Boston. And some interesting career for him. We have defenseman, Pittsburgh Penguins, Jim Morrison. Don't know much about him. He won the Eddie Shore Award in 65-66 with Quebec of the AHL. So he does have some credentials. He played a lot in the 50s with Boston and Toronto. Played with the Red Wings, played with the Rangers, but then he played a lot of years in the minors before getting called up to Pittsburgh for 2 seasons. Which is probably why I never heard of him. And then he did coaching in the OHL with the Kingston Canadians and AHL with the Baltimore Clippers. So don't really know him, don't have any of his other cards. Alright, now we're going to move into these are from the 1971 O-PEE-CHEE set, so 70-71. This is when Montreal famously beat Chicago, when Kenny Dryden came out of nowhere, and they upsetted the wildly favorite Blackhawks at the time. Montreal had what they were kind of a transition team at the time when they won. It's also the last year that Jean Beliveau played, and they drafted Guy Lafleur that spring. We have LA Kings center Juha Whiting. He's also one of the first players in the NHL to come from Finland, to have grown up in Finland and played hockey there most of his career. Played for the Kings, he played for the Rangers, then went to the Kings. and then went to the Cleveland Barons for a year before jumping to the WHA, because Cleveland at the time was moving to Minnesota in 77, 78. So he jumped to the W and played for Edmonton Oilers in 77, 78. So just missed the Gretzky year. He got traded from LA Kings with Gary Edwards to Cleveland Barons from Jim Moxey and Gary Simmons. Interesting enough, Gary Edwards would go back to Minnesota and play for in 79, 80. I paid $3 for him. It's a rookie card as well. And when I went back, last time I was at St. Jacobs, these cards were only $1. I was getting these for $1. So definitely jumped up in price. There are no marks on the back like the last time. Maybe that's why it's so much money. We have Detroit Red Wings defenseman Ron Harris. Paid $2 for his card. There's nothing wrong with it. It's in pretty good. They're in really good shape. The cards are. Played for the Detroit Red Wings, Atlanta Flames, and New York Rangers. Never won a cup. And right winger, Detroit Red Wings, Tim Eggleston, whatever you pronounce that name. He's in a St. Louis Blues jersey. He got traded from St. Louis to the Red Wings. I always thought he played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, like back in the 60s, but he never did. He only played like 51 games with the Leafs in the mid-70s. Actually been drafted in the second round, 9th overall in 1964 by the Rangers, back when the draft was pretty amateurish. I know he played for the Atlanta Flames because I have his cards there. He'd actually been traded from St. Louis with Gordon Red Berenson to Detroit Red Wings for Wayne Connolly and Gary Younger. I think St. Louis won that trade because Gary Younger was a really good player, an Iron Man. Then he was traded twice in one day. On November 1st, 1974, he was traded from the Leafs with Willie Brossart to Washington Capitals for Rod Sealing, and then traded from Washington Capitals to Atlanta Flames for future considerations and cash. So I think Toronto probably won that because they got Rod Sealing. No, I thought he won a cup with Toronto back in the 60s, but he went to 3 Stanley Cup Finals with St. Louis. We got left winger, Pittsburgh Penguins, Greg Polis. This is a rookie card as well. He was picked in the first round, 7th overall in the 1970 amateur draft. I've had several of his cards, mostly with the Rangers and with the Capitals. Spent 3.5 seasons in Pittsburgh before moving to St. Louis, and then the Rangers, and then Capitals. So he's traded from Pittsburgh Penguins with Brian Watson to St. Louis for Ab DeMarco, Steve Durbano, and J. Bob Kelly. So I don't know who won that trade because nobody won the Stanley Cup, but J. Bob Kelly was a pretty good player with Pittsburgh. So with Tim Eggleston and Greg Polis, I only paid $2 each. The cards are in pretty good shape. There's no tape stains on these two. And next we're going with LA Kings right winger Mike Byers. I have his card from his rookie card. He'd played with the Leafs, Flyers, Kings, Sabre, and would play for the Sabres one year. Jumped to the WHA and win a Avco trophy with the New England Whalers. Also won a Central Pacific Hockey League title with Tulsa Oilers. Another rookie card with New York Rangers right winger Bill Fairbairn. Paid $2 for this card. No dings in the back. Played for the Rangers when the Rangers actually had a pretty good team. He went to a Stanley Cup final in 72 but lost to the Bruins in 6 games. Played for Minnesota, then St. Louis. Had a couple of 20-goal seasons and then a 30-goal seasons in 73. So wasn't a bad player. I have several of his cards. We have Flyers right winger Bob Kelly. This is a rookie card. This is Bob Hound Dog Kelly, I believe his nickname is. This one has a tape mark on the back. He was drafted in the 3rd round, 32nd overall in the 1970 draft. He won 2 Stanley Cups with the Philadelphia Flyers. One of the tough guys on the team. He was like 5'10", weighed 200 pounds, so he threw his weight around quite a bit. Spent a lot of time in the penalty box. And he had a couple of 20-goal seasons. He also was traded to the Washington Capitals. Doesn't say for who, but he's got his 2 cup rings. He's part of those Broad Street Bullies. Last one I have is goalie for the LA Kings, Rogie Vachon. This card is famous for its very bad. Rogie Vachon had been with the Montreal Canadiens the year before. in 1971 when they won the Cup. He was the backup goalie to Ken Dryden. And him and Phil Meyer were in a very crowded back crease, so Rogie asked for a trade, so they traded in the LA Kings. And O-PEE-CHEE didn't have a card with him in the Kings uniform, so what they did was they just cut and pasted his head onto somebody else. That's not his body. In fact, Rogie looks like he just came off the beach. He's got a huge sunburn on his face. And this is how you don't do cut and paste stuff. He thinks the body belongs to Ross Lonsberry, who played for the Kings at the time and later went to the Philadelphia Flyers. So Rogie Vachon won 2 Stanley Cups with Montreal in 68 and 69. In those 2 Stanley Cup wins, he played 10 games. He was the main guy in 1969, the main goalie. Gump Worsley was the other goalie, I think, in 68. And then he went to the LA Kings, then Detroit Red Wings and Boston Bruins. Once he left LA, he wasn't the same goalie. He was terrible in Detroit and Boston. But in LA, they actually had some good... in the LA in the 70s, they had a decent team. They could never go far in the playoffs, even with Marcel Dion. They only went to the second round once. But he was traded on November 4th, 1971, which is why O-PEE-CHEE hadn't released the cards yet. And they had to do a quick hack job. So he got traded from Montreal to Los Angeles for Dennis DeJordy, another goalie, Noel Price, Doug Robinson, and Dale Hoganson. LA definitely won that trade. But Montreal won more cups, and Dale Hoganson, I think, won a cup too in 73. But there we have it. We got 15 cards, all from different years, all early 70s stuff. But going on to the Rogie Vachon, it's got some tape marks at the back. I only paid $3 for it, and it's an interesting card. If you read Ken Reed's book on hockey cards stories, you'll find this in one of them, in the first one, I believe. But it's definitely a how to not cut and paste, because it's definitely an interesting card. So what do you think? Is this the worst cut and paste job you've ever seen, or the worst attempt to change a guy to another team? Leave comments in the comment section, and until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.